Welcome back, everyone. So today we're going to take a look at a cold case from 1976. A case that took so many twists over the years that it was almost unbelievable if you don't read the entire transcript of it. And I'm going to do my best today to tell you about all the different twists and turns and where we are today in the final outcome of this case. So make sure you stay tuned to the end, because this one is bizarre. So, first, we're going to go back to February 24th, 1976. It was a nice day, weather-wise, that day, and the party that we're going to take a look at is Michelle Mitchell. She was 19 years old in Reno, Nevada. Michelle was a good kid. She was a young adult who was trying to make her way through life. She was enrolled in a teaching program there at the University of Nevada. She was working full-time, doing whatever she could to kind of, have some extra spending money while she was going to school. On top of it all, if she didn't have her plate filled already, she was helping to take care of her diabetic father. Her father in 1976, when you look at it in context, in 76, his medication, his insulin, and other medications that his doctors had him on wasn't quite taking care of his diabetes at the time. And Michelle, being a nursing student, wanted to learn along with and help her father in any way she could. Well, on this particular day, February 24th, 1976, Michelle's father called from his part-time job to her and said, "I'm having issues with my medication again today, and I'm not sure what I need to do." And she said, "Well, have you done this? Have you had anything to eat? Have you tried this? Have you, when was the last time you took your medication?" This was a basic conversation that she had had with him before. And she said, "Well, I'll tell you what I can do is I've got some orange juice and I've got some snacks here at the house. I'll grab them and I'll bring them to your work." Her father worked at a bowling alley part-time as a pin setter, and he also worked the front desk. As you would come in if you wanted to go bowling and you had to rent shoes. He rented out the shoes and did some minor things around the bowling alley. It wasn't much. They were well aware that he was diabetic and he needed to sit for periods of time, especially when he was getting closer to when he needed to take his medication. So Michelle got in her car, a 1970s model Super Beetle, yellow in color, and decided to take the orange juice and snacks to him at his work. While she was driving towards his work, she started to have engine problems with her car. And it got to the point where she was at right close to the intersection of Evans and Spring Road, and her car just gave up. It turned off and she wasn't able to restart it. Now, several people in this area had stopped to offer her a hand, but were unable to get the car to restart. One individual helped, along with his wife, push her off of the roadway onto the shoulder so she wasn't blocking traffic anymore. And she was going to walk to a nearby parking lot where she could see from where her car broke down to use a payphone to call her mother, to have her mother come and get her. Another passerby, shortly thereafter, had stopped and decided, "Well, no, let's not leave your car here alongside the road. Let me help you push your car into the parking lot, and then you can use the payphone." Other passerbyers and eyewitness reports that are in the police case file for this reported that the individual was approximately 5'8", slender build, with dirty brown hair, white Caucasian. It actually lists white/Caucasian on the report. And this individual was wearing blue jeans and a light grayish color t-shirt. That was the last and only report of someone who's seen this person helping her push her car into this parking lot. It should be noted that directly across the street from where this parking lot, where the car was pushed, is the University Agricultural Outreach Program. It's a study area with a lot of buildings where they agricultural students were growing different vegetables and fruits and crops indoors, and it was kind of like a science laboratory. But there are a lot of these little small greenhouse is all over the property. And farther behind that is where the actual university, the agricultural university, is. So give you kind of context of what this place looks like. So Michelle got her car pushed off the road into the parking lot, and she walked over to the payphone that she could see from where her car broke down, and she called her mother. She called her mother and said, "Look, Mom, my car finally broke down. It had given up, and it won't restart. I need you to come pick me up. This is where I'm at, and I'll be waiting for you here. I need to take orange juice and some snacks to Dad because he's just not feeling well." And her mom said, "I'll be there as soon as I can. It's probably going to take me about 15 minutes or so to get there." This, again, is all in the actual police report. So her mom packed up, got ready to leave and went to the actual location where Michelle said she broke down. She found Michelle's car in the parking lot facing towards the street, not towards the business that is there, but facing towards the street in a parking spot. She was nowhere around. Michelle had vanished. Nobody knew where Michelle had gone. In the car, the driver's window was down. The door wasn't open all the way, but it wasn't closed all the way. It had latched, but it was still open or ajar, I guess you could probably say. So her mother said, well, maybe she decided to walk off. She looked through the car. The orange juice was still sitting in the container on the floorboard in the front, along with a small little paper bag of snacks. The keys were still in the ignition. Not that anybody could steal it because it didn't run anymore. In the back seat was a sweater and other miscellaneous items that belonged to Michelle. They also saw a satchel bag on the passenger front seat. They believed it was a satchel bag that, not a purse, but it's kind of hard to describe exactly what it is. It had one long string on it, and it was a bag that Michelle would keep personal items in, and sometimes she kept, other, miscellaneous things in it. It wasn't her purse. It wasn't her wallet. It was an extra thing that she always carried with her somewhere else. But nothing really set off alarms for Mom. She's like, well, maybe she just didn't want to wait anymore, and she wanted to walk there to the bowling alley where her dad worked part-time to bring him something else. Or maybe she got a ride from a friend who happened to be coming by and seen her car broken down here. Not thinking anything of it. So her mom turned around and went home. Not thinking anything of it and nothing out of the ordinary at all. Dad gets off work and comes home. And he's like, hey, why didn't Michelle bring me the orange juice and candy bars that, and snacks that she said she was going to bring me? Now, her mom alarm goes off. Uh-oh. I thought somebody else gave her a ride because I went to go pick her up, but she was never there. What do we do? They start calling around. Friends, family, acquaintances, anyone that they could think of, her school, her work, anywhere to see where she is. Nobody's seen her. She just vanished without a trace. Nobody knew where Michelle went. The following morning, after a sleepless night, for both Edwin, her father, and her mother, they decided to go to the police department and file a missing persons report. They walked in, they filed the missing persons report. The police said, well, where's her car at? They gave her the location, the female officer at the front desk. They gave her the location of where the car was. The police dispatched an officer out to the car to see if they saw anything that looked out of the ordinary. And no, nothing out of the ordinary at all. The police decided, Well, there's a university across the street, and there's businesses here in this little plaza. Maybe somebody saw her, and they decided to canvass the area. They went to the businesses, nobody saw her. They went to across the street to the university, and it turned out that that actual day on, February 24th, there was nobody really there at the agricultural college that day in the greenhouses. It was one of those days where it was in-class study, and they weren't actually in the greenhouses working that day. So there wasn't any eyewitnesses. They canvassed around the area. No leads had popped up at all. So they did the next thing. They called detectives, and the detectives, along with another officer, showed up, and they brought a bloodhound, a dog who is trained in picking up scents and following trails. The dog came. They pulled some personal items from the back seat. The dog got a scent, put its nose down to the ground, and immediately started to lead the officers in a direction away from the businesses, the university, or the direction she would have been traveling if she was going to try to walk to the bowling alley from where her car was. Her parents, the bottoms fell out in their gut. They both knew something was terribly wrong, and their worst nightmares were about to come true later on that evening. So now it's the evening time on the following day, the February 25th, 1976. The police receive a 911 call from an elderly gentleman. An elderly gentleman who is, calling, and he's very vague to what the actual 911 call is all about. The total transcript of the 911 call is about 4 minutes in length. The beginning of the call, when the dispatcher asked for his name, he kept on talking, but he never gave his name. He just kept on saying, I need an officer dispatched to my home. He's not going to understand what I found. I need an officer sent here. When the dispatcher asked again, what is the emergency? Do you need paramedics? What do you need? He said, I came home. I found something. This is not good. I need an officer dispatched here. Lucky for everyone, right then and there, he finally, after about the 4-minute mark, gave his name and his address. Otherwise, it would have drawn out the investigation a lot longer because they would have had to have tried to trace the call. They dispatched an officer to the home. The elderly gentleman answered the front door and said, me and my wife were coming home. You're not going to believe what I found in the garage. I need you to come here to the garage. The officer and the elderly gentleman walked out the front door around to a detached garage. And he walked to the door and he said, I was pulling into the driveway. I got out to open the garage door. And this is not. And then he turned the handle to the door and opened it and turned on the light. There, lying on the ground, on the far wall, was a huge puddle of blood. A massive puddle of blood. Along the wall, curled up next to some stuff that had been stacked up in that corner, was Michelle Mitchell, dead at the age of 19. Her hands were bound, and her throat had been slashed. The detective looked closely at the area, stopped the elderly gentleman from coming into the garage itself, and then immediately called and had detectives come to the home while he secured the actual crime scene itself. Detectives came in and took several photographs before the body was removed. They were not sure at that time if Michelle Mitchell had been sexually assaulted or what really had happened, other than the facts were clear. Her hands were bound, and her throat was slashed, and she was alive for quite a bit after the fact that her throat was slashed, because there were signs all over in the garage that she had tried to escape or at least put up a huge struggle. Forensic evidence that was found in the garage was a bloody footprint in the garage that was on a dirt area and along a concrete pad that near the doorway, along with a blood smear on the jamb. And there was also a couple of droplets of blood on the left side of the rope that was attached to Michelle. The rope that was found on Michelle came from the elderly gentleman's garage. It was not a rope that was brought there. It was a rope that was found within the garage, and it belonged to this individual. So the case, they went forward. They contacted everyone. They canvassed the area. They asked neighbors, did anybody see anything? Did anybody see a car? Anything out of the ordinary? The 24th, at all. No one saw anything at all. Most people said, well, I was at work and had nothing to go on. And unfortunately, the case would turn cold fairly quickly. Fast forward 3 years. 1979. 1979, another 911 call would be made. But this call is in Alabama, not in Reno, Nevada, where Michelle Mitchell was killed in this garage. In Alabama. The 911 call was from a local business that said, I have a lady here who is acting, really suspicious, and I think she may be having mental health issues. The police were dispatched out to this call, and when they found this lady, she was babbling incoherently and was swinging her arms around and just being completely out of control. They called for a paramedic to come to aid them in this. They got the lady to calm down. They got her on a gurney and they brought her to the hospital. It turns out that this lady, Kathy Woods was a paranoid schizophrenic who was off her medication. She was not only at risk of harming herself, but she was at a risk to harming other people because she had no idea where she was, the date, anything. But she was convinced that she was being attacked by monsters, that monsters were trying to kill her. So they're at the hospital on the 3rd floor of the hospital. They have a psychiatric ward. They brought Kathy up there, and they said, okay, we're going to keep her here for the next 48 hours on a medical hold, and while we medicate her and get her back on the medication that she should be on. They reached out to contact any family, friends, or anybody to get information from them, but nobody would show up there at the hospital at all. 48 hours came and went, and she was still acting, extremely erratic, but she was better than where she was. So they decided to extend the 48-hour hold a little bit longer. That 48-hour hold turned into 7 days. 7 days of her being in the hospital, and finally the medication had taken its control of her, and she wasn't as violent and wasn't seeing things anymore, and it calmed down to the point where she could talk about where she came from, who she was, what was going on with her. As she sat there in the hospital, she said, I need to talk to someone. I need to speak with a detective. And they're like, well, what do you need to talk to a detective about? And she said, she informed the nurses there that she had something that she needed to confess to, that she needed to get off of her chest. 1979, she confesses to the murder of Michelle Mitchell. The detectives who showed up there at the hospital said, what? Who's Michelle Mitchell? We don't have a Michelle Mitchell here anywhere in the state of Alabama that is, named Michelle Mitchell who's been murdered. thinking again, she's out of her mind. The medication isn't quite, taking, working properly for her. She says, no, this happened in Reno, Nevada. Michelle Mitchell. So the police make a couple phone calls, and sure enough, 3 years prior, Michelle Mitchell's murder, happened in Reno, Nevada, February 24th, 1976. Once she was completely medicated, another 3 or 4 days later, they brought her to the local police department. There, Kathy Woods would sit down and talk to detectives endlessly. And as she sat there, she drank Coca-Cola after Coca-Cola after Coca-Cola, something that she couldn't get there at the hospital. They wouldn't give her, Coca-Cola. But she sat and talked to them. And the detectives finally got to the point, after several hours of talking with her, and said, well, do you really want to confess this crime now? Are you ready to write it all down? And she said, sure, I'll write it all down now. And in her own handwriting, she wrote out a complete confession. This confession that Kathy Woods would write out matched almost exactly to everything that happened to Michelle Mitchell. They offered her, the DA, a plea bargain. Plead guilty to this crime and be institutionalized in the mental health ward there at the ladies' prison. Or we can drag it out and you'll most likely get the death penalty. She said, well, if those are my choices, I'll take the psych ward, saving her life. Be institutionalized the rest of her life and get the medication and be on medication that she needed to be on all along. Fast forward now, 6 years. 1985. Michelle Mitchell murder has been long since closed, and everything is right with the world as far as the police departments there are concerned. Everyone is going about their lives, but not Kathy Woods. Kathy Woods is sitting in the mental health ward there in Alabama and says to another person who is being held against her will, well, that's what her words, she was being held against her will, that she needed to confess to something. She needed to get this off her chest. And Kathy Woods turns to this other patient and says, I never did it. I never killed this lady. I have no idea why I would confess to it. I was out of my mind when I confessed to the entire thing. This fellow inmate tries to reach out through her family to try to get a detective, a police officer, anyone in the state of Alabama to listen. And she was. She was successful eventually to get someone to come and sit down and just talk to Kathy Woods and say, what's your story? Why would you confess to this? If you didn't do it, how did you know it? And, well, it wasn't pretty. The truth finally started to crumble, especially in the light that in 1985, they were just starting to get around to doing DNA work. It was in the early stages of DNA where they could tell, within certainty if the blood type and certain things were going to be a match. She talked to this officer, who later would become a detective. And she tells him, she lays it all out. What happened, how she confessed, and how the detectives there in 1979 slowly fed her all the information that she needed to put into her confession. Kathy Woods, a poor schizophrenic with no one to help her at all, confessed to this heinous crime. And two detectives who wanted to close this case had spoon-fed her all the details to put into the confession. When they went back and they looked at the case, they're like, wow, it was unbelievable how These two detectives had said, well, don't forget to put this part in there. Don't forget to put part in there how you got her in the garage. And don't forget to talk about the shoes you were wearing. Things that only someone who committed the crime or had investigated the crime would have known. How did Kathy Woods know about Michelle Mitchell? While she was out before she confessed, while she was off her medication, she had read about the story in the newspaper and seen it on television because she was in and around the Nevada area at the time. And she had traveled between Nevada, Texas, and eventually Alabama, where she would go off her medication again. That is how Kathy Woods would know about the case, to confess to it. So now we are in 1985. DNA evidence. They're testing the rope. They're going to test the the blood droplet that is near the doorway. That is a smear. They're going to test the other forensic evidence, bodily fluid that was found on Michelle Mitchell's body. And the bombshell that would go off after they tested it. Not only did the DNA results come back that it wasn't Kathy Woods. It wasn't her at all. The DNA came back to a violent sexual predator who the police had on their list as a list of suspects in 1976. This individual was known to try to pick up hitchhikers and young women from the university where Kathy went to school, but also from the University of the Agricultural Studies there. This was his hunting ground. This young man who was a violent sexual predator, his fingerprints were found on the back window of Michelle Mitchell's car. And when the police came and talked to him in 1976, he said, yeah, I helped push her car off the road. But refused to answer any more questions other than that. And they couldn't build much of a case until later. Interesting side note about the individual, the violent sexual offender who the DNA would come back to, Rodney Halblower, who was born in Wisconsin, of course he was, is also a serial killer. Rodney Halblower is the serial killer who they now believe is behind what they called the Gypsy Hill murders. Rodney Halblower was born in Wisconsin, bounced around the United States his entire life. By the age, middle of his 20th year in America, alive on this earth, Rodney had already racked up an extensive criminal history of everything from theft to rape to burglaries to possibly murders by the age of 20. But yes, Rodney Halblower is currently serving 2 life sentences in California, and he will be extradited back to Nevada soon. Now let's jump back into this. So the DNA comes back. It was a match in CODIS because, yes, he had been arrested for a sexual assault and a rape before this. Attempted rape, actually. When they did this, and they tested his blood against the what was in the CODIS system and the FBI, it came back 99.975% match. When they presented him with the evidence that was in front of him, he said, I guess you guys want to talk about this, huh? Smug, smiling, and dismissive to anything that had really happened. We're talking about a woman who was murdered, and he could care less. A complete sociopath of an individual. And even in the detective's notes later on, they said, wow, How is it possible that this man was right there and everybody took the word of a paranoid schizophrenic and didn't look any more closely at this entire crime? So, 2020, here we are. Now, they know who actually did this crime. The family has some closure, but not complete closure, because he still hasn't been prosecuted for this crime. He is currently incarcerated. He is awaiting extradition back to Nevada to actually stand trial for the murder of Michelle Mitchell. Right now, the DA in Nevada there is looking at the death penalty. They want the death penalty for this man. I use that word loosely. But will the family finally, those who are still around after all these years, finally get closure? Justice for Michelle Mitchell. Hopefully, it happens in 2021. But at least now we know positively 99.975% that this was the individual who did it. Kathy Woods, the paranoid schizophrenic. In 2013, the court system there in the state of Alabama has decided that Kathy is a risk to herself. Even after all these years on medication, she's a harm to herself and she's a harm to anyone else out there because she doesn't want to stay on her medication. She has been made a ward of the state there in Alabama, which means that she will never leave some type of institution. If she is released from parole, probation, the entire justice system, she will be kept indefinitely in a mental health facility because she is a risk to herself and to others. But the case, what a wild, twisting ride from 1976 to 2020. And thank you, everyone, for joining me today. You stay safe out there. Until next time. Well, hello there. Welcome to the end of the video. Would you like to become a channel member or a Patreon supporter? Live links to become either or both are in the video description of every episode that I put out. I would appreciate if you'd check it out and consider becoming either a Patreon supporter or a channel member. You can do so for as little as $1 a month or 6 cents a day. Thank you very much for checking it out. I appreciate it. And love to each and every one of you who help support this content and keep this channel alive.